So our final chapter is chapter 12, and it's called Land Ho. When we got back to room 26, I was almost too tired to speak, but I managed to tell Og I'd had a great adventure, nearly drowned, but lived to tell the tale. Boing! At least he sounded interested. I didn't get to tell him more because the bell rang for recess and my classmates streamed out of the room. The room wasn't empty for long, though, because Mrs. Wright, Mr. Morales, and Miss Mack all joined Mrs. Brisbane in the classroom. "Do you have a minute, Sue?" the principal asked. He was still wearing his red shirt with a bright blue sash. He'd taken off his earring and eye patch, though. "Of course," she said. "Please sit down." It's always funny to see grown-ups sitting on the kid-sized chairs in the classroom. I try to imagine them as students. Mr. Morales would be a good student with a playful streak. Mrs. Brisbane would be an excellent student like Saya, of course. Miss Mack would be an almost perfect human like Miranda. But try as I did, I couldn't imagine Mrs. Wright as a child. Did any of the did any of the students admit to smuggling Humphrey on the boat? Mr. Morales asked. Mrs. Brisbane shook her head. No, I think Kirk and Richie felt so terrible they would have confessed to it, but they didn't. Maybe someone was jealous of their boat and did it to get them into trouble, Mrs. Wright suggested. Maybe, said Mrs. Brisbane, but I just can't imagine any of my students doing that. Mrs. Wright sniffed loudly. "I know you think all your students are perfect," she said, "but someone had to do it. He certainly couldn't have gotten there all by himself." Suddenly everyone turned to look at me. "I didn't plan on going along," I squeaked in self-defense. "It just happened." Miss Mack laughed her lovely, tinkling laugh. "He's been known to get out of his cage before," Mrs. Brisbane said, "but Bert fixed the door so he couldn't get out." Mrs. Wright stood up and clomped over to my cage. "Even if he could open the cage, you can't tell me this little rat or guinea pig or whatever it is could possibly get down from the table, run all across the room, and get into the boat by himself. Impossible. Simply impossible." "I am a hamster," I squeaked back at her, "and it's not impossible." Boing, 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 Og chimed in. This time everyone laughed, except Mrs. Wright. I guess Mr. Morales was sorry he'd laughed. "You have a point, Ruth." Mrs. Wright sniffed again. Maybe she was allergic to hamsters. "You can't have animals running willy-nilly around the school and the buses and on picnics." "I was only one animal," Mrs. Brisbane said softly. The bell rang again and Mr. Morales stood up. "Look, Mrs. Brisbane had been handling her students and their problems for 30 years. I think she can handle this one. Let's move on." He left, along with Miss Mack and Mrs. Wright. Just before my friends returned from recess, Mrs. Brisbane came over to my cage and jiggled the door. It was fastened tightly, of course. "Humphrey, I must say, life is never dull with you around." "Thanks," I squeaked. "That's what a classroom hamster is for." After school, when we were all alone, I told Og the whole story. When I finished, I remembered something else. "I have to say, Og, that as I was about to sink, I thought of you." It was strange to remember seeing his goofy face flash before me. "I know if you'd been there, you would have saved me because you can swim, and because you're my friend." I was surprised at how quickly Og responded with a boing, 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 boing. "I'd do the same for you," I continued. "I can't swim, but I'd think of something. I guess we could make a pretty good team after all. Maybe Kirk and Richie will too." Og dived into the water with an impressive splash, and with that I crawled into my sleeping hut and slept soundly, dreaming about the high seas, pirates, best friends, and yes, Miss Mack. No more boat building, no more pirate talk, no more contests. The very next day we were back to regular old school again, but after my close call with Davy Jones' slacker, I didn't mind. Not that the subject of the boat race didn't come up. Mrs. Brisbane began the day with a very serious look on her face. "Boys and girls, we still don't know who sneaked Humphrey into that boat and onto the bus. If the guilty party would like to confess now, it would make all our lives a little easier." There were some shuffling feet and a few clear throat, but no one confessed. There was no one to confess, except for me. "I hate to punish the whole class," Mrs. Brisbane began. I couldn't take it any longer. "I did it! It was me, me, me!" I squeaked as loudly as I could. Everyone laughed, even Mrs. Brisbane. "I guess Humphrey has the last word for now," she said. "If anybody would like to confess to me in private, I'd appreciate it. Meanwhile, we're moving on." Over the next few days, there was a few changes in room 26. First of all, Richie and Kirk had to write letters of apology to each other. Then each of them had to give a speech to the class, apologizing for almost ruining the boat race. In his speech, Kirk said that teamwork was more important than winning, and that the team that works together always comes out ahead in the end. As usual, he ended with a joke. This time it was one I'd already heard, about the scarecrow winning the award for being outstanding in his field. Richie made the point of that two wrongs don't make a right. At first I thought he was talking about Mrs. Wright, and I shivered a little just thinking about her whistle, though she's a very good song leader. But then I realized that he meant just because Kirk treated Richie the wrong way didn't make it right for Richie to break the rules and bring along the submarine. I cheered loudly for both speeches. Aldo changed back to his regular non-pirate ways of talking and cleaning, thank goodness. But every once in a while he'd do a little hornpipe dance while he was dusting. The other change in room 26 was something or someone wonderful. Miss Mack came in to help Mrs. Brisbane for 2 hours every day. Then she would go to the library and help Mr. Fitch for another hour or two. She smelled so good, and she always remembered to bring me yummy treats like apple slices and strawberries. Having her around was a dream come true. One day she asked Mrs. Brisbane if she could have lunch with her. They sat across from each other at Mrs. Brisbane's desk and took out sandwiches and water and yummy-looking fruit, and they talked. "I'm so glad it worked out with Humphrey," Miss Mack said. "When I left here I wasn't sure you'd like having a classroom hamster." "I wasn't sure myself," Mrs. Brisbane admitted, "but he's added a lot to the class." "Good," said Miss Mack. She chewed on her sandwich a little more and then said, "I'm a little worried about what I'm going to do now that I'm back. I need to make some money." "Funny, I've been worrying about that too," Mrs. Brisbane replied. She didn't look worried, though. In fact, she was grinning. "And I have some ideas." Miss Mack's big brown eyes got even bigger. "What?" "I don't want to say yet, but you are a very talented young teacher, and I know of several opportunities coming up." Mrs. Brisbane was being awfully mysterious. "You'll find out soon." What?" I shouted. The two women chuckled. "It sounds like Humphrey has a few ideas too," Miss Mack said. "He always does," Mrs. Brisbane agreed. "Speaking of Humphrey, has anyone confessed to smuggling him into the boat?" "Well, yes. You actually heard him confess." Mrs. Brisbane had understood me. Miss Mack glanced over at my cage. "Could Humphrey really do that?" Mrs. Brisbane looked my way too. "If there's one thing I've learned this year, when it comes to Humphrey, anything is possible." "Boing, boing!" Og twanged, splashing in his tank. The two teachers burst out laughing. When they finished their lunches, they each gave me a treat. From Mrs. Brisbane it was a small and crunchy carrot. From Miss Mack it was a soft, sweet slice of banana. I crossed my paws and hoped they'd have lunch in room 26 more often. And then something really wonderful happened. Miss Mack brought Mr. Fitch to room 26 one day. He said that due to my bravery during the boat race and my contributions to the class, he was presenting me with my very own library card. And there it was, a lovely little rectangle that read, "This card grants full library privileges at Longfellow School to Humphrey." He taped it to the outside of my cage. Everyone applauded. Then Miranda Golden, my special friend, raised her hand. "But how is Humphrey going to check out books? He can't get to the library by himself." Oh, humans. There's so much they don't know. In fact, I was already planning to stroll down to the library later that night to see if there was a good movie I could watch. "We'll just have to help him out," Mrs. Brisbane answered, "just like he's always helped us." "Hooray for Humphrey Dumpty!" AJ suddenly shouted. My friends all joined in, and I even heard Og say "boing" in agreement. "Thanks, mateys," I squeaked back happily. "Hooray, hooray, hooray." Even a pirate can say thank you, mateys. From Jolly Roger's Guide to Life by I.C. Waters.